Good evening. Tonight, the world watches a dangerous intersection of diplomacy and military brinkmanship unfolding across the Persian Gulf. Two of the world's most powerful nations, the United States and Iran, sit at opposite ends of a negotiating table in Geneva, Switzerland. But outside that room, the language being spoken is anything but diplomatic. Iran's supreme leader issued a direct threat against American naval forces stationed in the region. Iranian military forces temporarily closed parts of one of the world's most critical oil shipping lanes. And the United States responded not with words, but by deploying an additional aircraft carrier strike group toward the Middle East. Tonight, we break down every development, what was said, what was done, and what it all means for the world. The second round of indirect nuclear negotiations between Washington and Tehran concluded on Tuesday in Geneva, Switzerland. These talks were held at the private residence of Oman's envoy to the United Nations under heavy security. Crucially, the two delegations did not sit in the same room. All communication was passed through Omani mediators, a format that reflects the deep and lasting mistrust between both sides. On the American side, the delegation was led by White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Iran was represented by its foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi. Oman's diplomatic team served as the go-between, physically carrying proposals and responses from one room to the other. After hours of indirect discussions, both sides emerged with cautious, carefully worded statements. Iran's foreign minister described this round as more productive than the first. He said the parties had reached understandings on several core principles and would now begin exchanging draft documents. He was careful, however, to temper expectations, making clear that progress on paper does not mean a deal is near and that the road ahead remains very long. From the American side, the message was similar. There is forward movement, but significant gaps remain. The critical detail revealed after the session was this: Iran has been given approximately 2 weeks to return with detailed proposals aimed at narrowing those gaps. No agreement was signed. No breakthrough was announced. The clock is now ticking. While diplomats were exchanging messages in the Swiss capital, a very different conversation was taking place back in the Gulf. And it is this contrast, diplomatic optimism in Geneva, military posturing in the Persian Gulf, that analysts say defines Iran's negotiating strategy. It is a calculated approach. Smile at the table while raising your fist in the background. Hours before the Geneva talks resumed on Tuesday, Iran's supreme leader delivered a pointed warning aimed directly at the United States military. Without referencing the negotiations explicitly, he made clear that even the most powerful armed forces in the world are not immune to catastrophic losses. His message was specifically directed at American naval assets currently positioned near Iranian waters, a signal to Washington that any military action against Iran would come at an enormous cost. The United States military did not appear deterred. Officials confirmed that the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group is currently en route to the Middle East, where it will join the USS Abraham Lincoln already deployed in the region. In the past 24 hours, additional American military aircraft, including advanced stealth and multi-role fighter jets, have also been repositioned closer to the theater of potential conflict. Units that were originally scheduled to rotate out of the region have been ordered to extend their deployments. This is, in the language of international relations, coercive diplomacy, negotiating while a visible military threat sits on the table. Both sides are practicing it. Iran displays its missiles. America moves its carriers. At precisely the same time that diplomats were meeting in Geneva, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps carried out a significant military exercise in and around the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow but vital waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to global shipping lanes. For several hours on Tuesday, Iran announced and enforced a partial closure of sections of the strait. Revolutionary Guard naval forces fired live anti-ship missiles. Troops conducted a simulated seizure of an oil tanker. Iranian state media described the exercise as a demonstration of military readiness, operational precision, and full control over the waterway. The strategic weight of this action cannot be overstated. Approximately 1/5 of all globally traded oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. When Iran signals that it can disrupt this corridor, even for a few hours, it is not merely making a military point. It is sending a message to financial markets, to energy importing nations across Asia and Europe, and to Washington itself. The exercise caused brief movement in global oil futures. even as diplomatic optimism from Geneva partially offset those gains by the end of the trading day. The question that analysts and energy markets are asking tonight is a sobering one. If Iran conducts this scale of military exercise while negotiations are actively ongoing, what escalatory steps might it take if those negotiations collapse entirely? Let us be precise about the current state of these negotiations, because the optimistic public language from both delegations can obscure the depth of the disagreements that remain. The United States has entered these talks with a clear and firm central demand: zero uranium enrichment on Iranian soil, not limited enrichment, not enrichment capped at a low percentage, complete and total cessation. American officials have also insisted that the negotiations must expand beyond the nuclear file to include Iran's ballistic missile program and its financial and operational support for armed proxy groups across the broader region, from Lebanon to Iraq to Yemen. Iran's position is equally firm and publicly stated. Tehran has declared that its nuclear program is peaceful and non-negotiable. The country's president stated plainly that Iran will not abandon its enrichment capabilities under any circumstances. Iranian diplomats have drawn a hard line, excluding any discussion of their missile program or regional alliances, calling these matters entirely outside the scope of the current talks. Where there is some limited movement, Iran floated the idea of temporarily freezing uranium enrichment, potentially for up to 3 years, and transferring portions of its existing stockpile to a neutral third country. Tehran also raised economic incentives, suggesting that a successful deal could open doors for American investment in Iranian energy and mining sectors, the joint development of oil and gas fields, and potentially aircraft purchases. These are significant proposals, deliberately designed to create economic stakeholders in the success of any eventual agreement. But intelligence assessments in both Washington and Jerusalem remain skeptical. The core gaps on enrichment levels, on missiles, on proxy networks have not closed. And Iran's negotiating behavior, consistently pairing public optimism with parallel military demonstrations, has led some analysts to conclude that Tehran's primary objective in these talks may be to reduce international pressure and buy time, rather than reach a genuine and comprehensive agreement. President Donald Trump addressed the negotiations publicly before the Geneva round opened, and his remarks carried the unmistakable weight of recent military history. The president expressed hope that Iranian leaders would act rationally, while adding that he does not believe Tehran wants to experience the consequences of failing to reach an agreement. Notably, the president referenced prior military action, specifically American strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities that followed the breakdown of earlier diplomatic efforts. He made clear that while he would strongly prefer to avoid reaching that decision point again, the choice ultimately rests with Tehran and how it chooses to engage in the weeks ahead. Trump's public posture, simultaneously extending a diplomatic hand while referencing military capability, mirrors the broader American strategy currently in play across the region. The message to Iran is consistent and deliberate. A negotiated deal is available and preferred, but a military alternative is present, prepared, and within reach. Any serious analysis of the Iran nuclear standoff must account for its regional dimensions, and tonight that means turning to Lebanon. Israeli defense officials have stated clearly that Hezbollah, the Iran-backed armed organization operating out of southern Lebanon, represents the most immediate potential threat in any scenario where the United States takes military action against Iran. Israeli intelligence assessments indicate that Iran is actively working to rebuild Hezbollah's military infrastructure, positioning the group as a ready-to-activate deterrent force against Israel. In response, Israeli defense forces have significantly increased the pace and precision of strikes against weapons storage facilities and operational commanders inside Lebanon over recent days. The stated objective is to degrade Hezbollah's capacity to rebuild and rearm before a potential regional escalation. On the diplomatic track, regional stakeholders have proposed frameworks for addressing Hezbollah's weapons stockpiles through negotiated arrangements, with the Lebanese National Army potentially playing a supervisory role backed by international guarantees. However, Hezbollah has rejected any discussion of disarmament in absolute terms, declaring it will not surrender any weapons. The situation along the Lebanese border remains one of the most volatile pressure points in the region. In the Gaza Strip, a fragile and contested quiet persists on paper. But conditions on the ground tell a considerably more complicated story. With the Muslim holy month of Ramadan approaching, Hamas has deployed its internal security and police apparatus across the territory, establishing visible checkpoints at markets, main roads, mosques, and major intersections. While Hamas has framed this deployment in civilian terms, managing market prices, preventing fraud, organizing pedestrian flow during peak prayer times, defense analysts characterize it differently. They describe it as a deliberate reassertion of political and organizational authority over the civilian population, timed to a period of heightened public visibility. Of greater security concern is the ongoing evidence of weapons smuggling and stockpiling. Israeli military forces operating in the southern Gaza corridor recently uncovered a significant weapons cache attributed to Hamas fighters. Defense analysts estimate that only approximately 20% of Gaza's underground tunnel infrastructure has been dismantled to date, leaving the vast majority of Hamas's military network intact and functional. Hamas leadership has publicly and consistently refused to engage on the subject of disarmament, framing its military capability as a matter of fundamental principle. Internal leadership elections are also reportedly nearing completion within the organization, with results expected to define Hamas's strategic direction for the period ahead. Tonight's developments present a picture that is as clear as it is concerning. In Geneva, diplomats speak carefully about progress, principles, and draft agreements. In the Persian Gulf, military forces speak in the language of live missiles, closing waterways, and advancing warships. And across the region, from Lebanon to Gaza to the waters off Iran's southern coast, armed groups and national militaries are quietly preparing for scenarios that no one at the negotiating table wants to discuss publicly. The 2 weeks granted to Iran to return with detailed proposals represent a critical window. Whether Tehran uses that time to genuinely close gaps or to further consolidate its positions will tell us a great deal about whether this diplomatic process has a realistic path forward or whether the world is witnessing the early stages of a far more dangerous confrontation. The United States has 2 carrier strike groups approaching the region. Iran has demonstrated both the willingness and the capability to threaten global energy supply. Israel is actively conducting strikes in Lebanon, and the talks in Geneva are still described officially as progressing. We will continue to monitor every development in this story. For now, this has been your Nightly World Report. Stay informed, stay vigilant. Good night.